Jimmy Page.
James Patrick Jimmy Page, OBE, is an English musician, songwriter and record producer who achieved international success as the guitarist and leader of the rock band Led Zeppelin. Page began his career as a studio session musician in London and, by the mid-1960s, he had become the most sought-after session guitarist in England. He was a member of the Yardbirds from 1966 to 1968. In late 1968, he founded Led Zeppelin. Page is widely considered to be one of the greatest and most influential guitarists of all time. Rolling Stone magazine has described Page as the pontiff of power riffing, and ranked him number 3 in their list of the 100 greatest guitarists of all time. In 2010, he was ranked number 2 in Gibson's list of top 50 guitarists of all time, and, in 2007, number 4 on Classic Rock's 100 Wildest Guitar Heroes. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice. Once as a member of the Yardbirds, 1992, and once as a member of Led Zeppelin, 1995. Page has been described by Uncut as rock's greatest and most mysterious guitar hero. Los Angeles Times magazine voted Jimmy Page the second greatest guitarist of all time.
Early life.
Jimmy Page was born to James Patrick Page and Patricia Elizabeth Page, née Gaffigan, in the West London suburb of Heston, which today forms part of the London Borough of Hounslow. His father was an industrial personnel manager and his mother, who was of Irish descent, was a doctor's secretary. In 1952, they moved to Feltham and then to Miles Road, Epsom in Surrey, which is where Page came across his first guitar. I don't know whether was left behind by the people before, or whether it was a friend of the family's, nobody seemed to know why it was there. First playing the instrument at age 12, he took a few lessons in nearby Kingston, but was largely self-taught. Among Page's early influences were rockabilly guitarists Scotty Moore and James Burton, who both played on recordings made by Elvis Presley. Presley's song Baby Let's Play House is cited by Page as being his inspiration to take up the guitar. Although he appeared on BBC One in 1957 with the Hofner President, Page states that his first guitar was a second-hand 1959 Futurama Grazioso, later replaced by a Fender Telecaster. Page's musical tastes included skiffle, a popular English music genre of the time, and acoustic folk playing, and the blues sounds of Elmore James, B.B. King, Otis Rush, Buddy Guy, Freddie King and Hubert Sumlin. Basically, that was the start, a mixture between rock and blues. At 13, Page appeared on Hugh Weldon's All Your Own Talent Quest program in a skiffle quartet, one performance of which aired on BBC One in 1957. The group played Mama Don't Want to Skiffle Anymore, and another American-flavored song, In the Mole Cotton Fields Back Home. When asked by Weldon what he wanted to do after schooling, Page said, "I want to do biological research to find a cure for cancer, if it isn't discovered by then." In an interview with Guitar Player magazine, Page stated that there was a lot of busking in the early days, but as they say, I had to come to grips with it and it was a good schooling. Page took a guitar to school each day only to have it confiscated and returned to him after class. Although interviewed for a job as a laboratory assistant, he ultimately chose to leave Danetry Secondary School, West Ewell, to pursue music. Initially, Page had difficulty finding other musicians with whom he could play on a regular basis. It wasn't as though there was an abundance. I used to play in many groups. Anyone who could get a gig together, really. Following stints backing recitals by beat poet Royston Ellis at the Mermaid Theatre between 1960-61, and singer Red E. Lewis, he was asked by singer Neil Christian to join his band, the Crusaders, after Christian had seen a 15-year-old Page playing in a local hall. Page toured with Christian for approximately 2 years and later played on several of his records, including the 1962 single, The Road to Love. During his stint with Christian, Page fell seriously ill with glandular fever, infectious mononucleosis, and could not continue touring. While recovering, he decided to put his musical career on hold and concentrate on his other love, painting. and enrolled at Sutton Art College in Surrey. As he explained in 1975.
Early 1960s, session musician.
While still a student, Page often performed on stage at the Marquee with bands such as Cyril Davis All-Stars, Alexis Corner's Blues Incorporated and fellow guitarists Jeff Beck and Eric Clapton. He was spotted one night by John Gibb of Brian Howard and the Silhouettes, who asked him to help record some singles for Columbia Graphophone Company, including The Worrying Kind. Mike Leander of Decca Records first offered Page regular studio work. His first session for the label was the recording Diamonds by Jet Harris and Tony Meehan, which went to #1 on the singles chart in early 1963. After brief stints with Carter Lewis and the Southerners, Mike Hurst and the Method and Mickey Finn and the Blue Men, Page committed himself to full-time session work. As a session guitarist he was known as Lil Jim P to prevent confusion with the other noted English session guitarist Big Jim Sullivan. Page was mainly called into sessions as insurance in instances when a replacement or second guitarist was required by the recording artist. "It was usually myself and a drummer," he explained, "though they never mention the drummer these days, just me. Anyone needing a guitarist either went to Big Jim or myself." He stated that in the initial stages they just said, "Play what you want," 'cause at the time I couldn't read music or anything. Page was the favorite session guitarist of record producer Shel Talmy. As a result, he secured session work on songs for The Who and the Kinks. Page is credited with playing acoustic 12-string guitar on 2 tracks on the Kinks' debut album I'm a Lover Not a Fighter, and I've Been Driving on Bald Mountain, and possibly on the B-side I Gotta Move. He played rhythm guitar on the sessions for The Who's first single I Can't Explain, although Pete Townshend was reluctant to allow Page's contribution on the final recording. Page also played lead guitar on the B-side Bald-Headed Woman. Page's studio gigs in 1964 included Marianne Faithfull's As Tears Go By, the Nashville Teens' Tobacco Road, the Rolling Stones' Heart of Stone, released on Metamorphosis, Van Morrison and Them's Baby Please Don't Go, and Here Comes the Night, Dave Berry's The Crying Game, and My Baby Left Me, Brenda Lee's Is It True, and Petula Clark's Downtown. In 1965 Page was hired by Stones manager Andrew Lou Golden to act as house producer and A&R man for the newly formed Immediate Records label, which allowed him to play on and/or produce tracks by John Mayall, Nico, Chris Farlowe, Twice as Much and Clapton. Page also formed a brief songwriting partnership with then romantic interest, Jackie DeShannon. He composed and recorded songs for the John Williams, not the classical guitarist John Williams, album The Maureen Wishful album with Big Jim Sullivan. Page worked as session musician on Donovan Leitch's Sunshine Superman, 1966, and the Johnny Hallyday albums June Whom, 1968, and Jay Swesney Dan's La Rue, 1969, the Al Stewart album Love Chronicles, 1969, and played guitar on 5 tracks of Joe Cocker's debut album, With a Little Help from My Friends. Over the years since 1970 Page played lead guitar on 10 Roy Harper tracks, comprising 81 minutes of music. When questioned about which songs he played on, especially ones where there exists some controversy as to what his exact role was, Page often points out that it is hard to remember exactly what he did given the enormous number of sessions he was playing at the time. In a radio interview he explained that I was doing 3 sessions a day, 15 sessions a week. Sometimes I would be playing with a group, sometimes I could be doing film music, it could be a folk session. I was able to fit all these different roles. Although Page recorded with many notable musicians, a lot of these early tracks are only available as bootleg recordings, several of which were released by the Led Zeppelin fan club in the late 1970s. One of the rarest of these is the early jam session featuring Jimmy Page and Stones guitarist Keith Richards covering Robert Johnson's Little Queen of Spades. Several early tracks with Page were compiled on the twin album release, Jimmy Page, Session Man. Page also recorded with Richards on guitar and vocals in Olympic Sound Studios on October 15, 1974. Along with Rick Rich on bass and Bruce Rowland on drums, a track called Scarlet was cut. Page reflected later in an interview with Rolling Stone's Cameron Crowe, I did what could possibly be the next Stones B-side. It was Rick Rich, Keith and me doing a number called Scarlet. I can't remember the drummer. It sounded very similar in style and mood to those Blonde on Blonde tracks. It was great, really good. We stayed up all night and went down to Island Studios where Keith put some reggae guitars over one section. I just put some solos on it, but it was 8 in the morning of the next day before I did that. He took the tapes to Switzerland and someone found out about them. Keith told people that it was a track for my album. Page left studio work when the increasing influence of Stax Records on popular music led to the greater incorporation of brass and orchestral arrangements into recordings at the expense of guitars. He stated that his time as a session player served as extremely good schooling.
Late 1960s, The Yardbirds.
In late 1964, Page was approached about the possibility of replacing Eric Clapton in the Yardbirds, but he declined out of loyalty to his friend. In February 1965 Clapton quit the Yardbirds and Page was formally offered his spot, but because he was unwilling to give up his lucrative career as a session musician and because he was still worried about his health under touring conditions, he suggested his friend, Jeff Beck. On May 16, 1966, drummer Keith Moon, bass player John Paul Jones, keyboardist Nicky Hopkins, Jeff Beck and Page recorded Beck's Bolero in London's IBC Studios. The experience gave Page an idea to form a new supergroup featuring Beck, along with The Who's John Entwistle on bass and Keith Moon on drums. However, the lack of a quality vocalist and contractual problems prevented the project from getting off the ground. During this time, Moon suggested the name Led Zeppelin for the first time, after Entwistle commented that the proceedings would take to the air like a lead balloon. Within weeks, Page attended a Yardbirds concert at Oxford. After the show he went backstage where Paul Samwell Smith announced that he was leaving the group. Page offered to replace Samwell Smith, and this was accepted by the group. He initially played electric bass with the Yardbirds before finally switching to twin lead guitar with Beck when Chris Dredger moved to bass. The musical potential of the lineup was scuttled, however, by interpersonal conflicts caused by constant touring and a lack of commercial success, although they released one single, Happenings 10 Years' Time Ago. While Page and Jeff Beck played together in the Yardbirds, the trio of Page, Beck and Clapton never played in the original group at the same time. The three guitarists did appear on stage together at the ARMS charity concerts in 1983. After Beck's departure, the Yardbirds remained a quartet. They recorded one album with Page on lead guitar, Little Games. The album received indifferent reviews and was not a commercial success, peaking at only number 80 on the Billboard 200. Though their studio sound was fairly commercial at the time, the band's live performances were just the opposite, becoming heavier and more experimental. These concerts featured musical aspects that Page would later perfect with Led Zeppelin, most notably performances of Dazed and Confused. After the departure of Keith Relf and Jim McCarty in 1968, Page reconfigured the group with a new lineup to fulfill unfinished tour dates in Scandinavia. As he said, to this end, Page recruited vocalist Robert Plant and drummer John Bonham, and he was also contacted by John Paul Jones, who asked to join. During the Scandinavian tour the new group appeared as the New Yardbirds, but soon recalled the old joke by Keith Moon and John Entwistle. Page stuck with that name to use for his new band. Peter Grant changed it to Led Zeppelin, to avoid a mispronunciation of Led Zeppelin.
1968-80, Led Zeppelin.
Led Zeppelin are one of the best-selling music artists in the history of audio recording. Various sources estimate the group's sales at more than 200 or even 300 million albums worldwide. With 111.5 million RIAA-certified units they are the second best-selling band in the United States. Each of their 9 studio albums reached a top 10 of the U.S. Billboard album chart, and 6 reached the number 1 spot. Led Zeppelin were the progenitors of heavy metal and hard rock, and their sound was largely the product of Page's input as a producer and musician. The band's individualistic style drew from a wide variety of influences, including folk music. They performed on multiple record-breaking concert tours, which also earned them a reputation for excess. Although they remained commercially and critically successful, in the later 1970s, the band's output and touring schedule were limited by the personal difficulties of the members. Page explained that he had a very specific idea in mind as to what he wanted Led Zeppelin to be, from the very beginning.
Post-Led Zeppelin career.
Led Zeppelin broke up in 1980 following the death of drummer John Bonham at Page's home, the Old Mill House at Clewer in Berkshire. Page initially refused to touch a guitar, grieving for his friend. Thereafter, his work consisted of a series of short-term collaborations in the bands The Firm, the Onide Rippers, reunions and individual work, including film soundtracks. He also became active in philanthropic work.
1980s.
Page made a return to the stage at a Jeff Beck show in March 1981 at the Hammersmith Odeon. Also in 1981, Page joined with Yes bassist Chris Squire and drummer Alan White to form a supergroup called XYZ, for Yes Zeppelin. They rehearsed several times, but the project was shelved. Bootlegs of these sessions revealed that some of the material emerged on later projects, notably The Firm's Fortune Hunter, and Yes songs Mind Drive, and Can You Imagine? Page joined Yes on stage in 1984 at Westfalenhall in Dortmund, Germany, playing I'm Down. In 1982 Page collaborated with director Michael Winner to record the Death Wish 2 soundtrack. This and several subsequent Page recordings, including the Death Wish 3 soundtrack, 1985, were recorded and produced at his recording studio, The Soul in Cookham, which he had purchased from Gus Dudgeon in the early 1980s. In 1983 Page appeared with the ARMS, Action Research for Multiple Sclerosis, charity series of concerts which honored Small Faces bassist Ronnie Lane, who suffered from the disease. For the first shows at the Royal Albert Hall in London, Page's set consisted of songs from the Death Wish 2 soundtrack, with Steve Winwood on vocals, and an instrumental version of Stairway to Heaven. A four-city tour of the United States followed, with Paul Rodgers of Bad Company replacing Winwood. During the tour, Page and Rodgers performed Midnight Moonlight, which would later appear on the Firm's first album. All of the shows featured an on-stage jam of Layla that reunited Page with Yardbirds guitarists Beck and Clapton. According to the book Hammer of the Gods, it was reportedly around this time that Page told friends that he had just ended 7 years of heroin use. On December 13, 1983, Page joined Plant on stage for one encore at the Hammersmith Odeon in London. Page next linked up with Roy Harper for the 1984 album Whatever Happened to Jugular? And occasional concerts, performing a predominantly acoustic set at folk festivals under various guises such as the McGregors and themselves. Also in 1984 Page recorded with Plant as the Onide Rippers the album The Onide Rippers, Volume 1 and with John Paul Jones on the film soundtrack Scream for Help. Page subsequently collaborated with Rodgers on 2 albums under the name The Firm. The first album, released in 1985, was the self-titled The Firm. Popular songs included Radioactive, and Satisfaction Guaranteed. The album peaked at number 17 on the Billboard Pop Albums chart and went gold in the US. It was followed by Mean Business in 1986. The band toured in support of both albums, but soon split up. Various other projects followed, such as session work for Graham Nash, Stephen Stills and the Rolling Stones, on their 1986 single One Hit, To the Body. In 1986, Page reunited temporarily with his ex-Yardbirds bandmates to play on several tracks of the Box of Rocks album Strange Land. Page released a solo album entitled Outrider in 1988 which featured contributions from Plant, with Page contributing in turn to Plant's solo album Now and Then, which was released the same year. Throughout these years Page also reunited with the other former bandmates of Led Zeppelin to perform live on a few occasions, most notably in 1985 for the Live Aid concert with both Phil Collins and Tony Thompson filling drum duties. However, the band members considered this performance to be substandard, with Page having been let down by a poorly tuned Les Paul. Page, Plant and Jones, as well as John Bonham's son Jason, performed at the Atlantic Records' 40th anniversary show on May 14, 1988, closing the 12-hour show.
1990s.
In 1990, a Nebworth concert to aid the Nordhoff Robbins Music Therapy Centre and the British School for Performing Arts and Technology saw Plant unexpectedly joined by Page to perform Misty Mountain Hop, Wearing and Tearing, and Rock and Roll. Page also performed with the band's former members at Jason Bonham's wedding. Page also embarked on a collaboration with David Coverdale in 1993 entitled Coverdale-Page. In 1994, Page reunited with Plant for the penultimate performance in MTV's Unplugged series. The 90-minute special, dubbed Unleaded, premiered to the highest ratings in MTV's history. In October of the same year, the session was released as the CD No Quarter, Jimmy Page and Robert Plant Unleaded, and in 2004 as the DVD No Quarter Unleaded. Following a highly successful mid-90s tour to support No Quarter, Page and Plant recorded 1998's Walking into Clarksdale. Page was heavily involved in remastering the Led Zeppelin catalog. He participated in various charity concerts and charity work, particularly the Action for Brazil's Children Trust, ABC Trust, founded by his wife Jimena Gomez Paracha in 1998. In the same year, Page played guitar for rap singer-producer Puff Daddy's song Come With Me, which heavily samples Led Zeppelin's Kashmir, and was included in the soundtrack of Godzilla. The two later performed the song on Saturday Night Live. In October 1999, Page teamed up with the Black Crowes for a two-night performance of material from the Led Zeppelin catalog and old blues and rock standards. The concert was recorded and released as a double live album, Live at the Greek, in 2000. In 2001 he made an appearance on stage with Limp Bizkit frontman Fred Durst and Louise Scantlin of Puddle of Mudd at the MTV Europe Video Music Awards in Frankfurt, where they performed a version of Led Zeppelin's Thank You.
2000s.
In 2005, Page was appointed Officer of the Order of the British Empire, OBE, in recognition of his Brazilian charity work for Task Brazil and Action for Brazil's Children's Trust, made an honorary citizen of Rio de Janeiro later that year and was awarded a Grammy Award. In November 2006, Led Zeppelin was inducted into the UK Music Hall of Fame. The television broadcasting of the event consisted of an introduction to the band by various famous admirers, including Roger Taylor, Slash, Joe Perry, Steven Tyler, Jack White and Tony Iommi, a presentation of an award to Jimmy Page and then a short speech by the guitarist. After this, rock group Wolf Mother played a tribute to Led Zeppelin, playing the song Communication Breakdown. In 2006, Page attended the induction of Led Zeppelin to the UK Music Hall of Fame. During an interview for the BBC for said event, he expressed plans to record new material in 2007, saying, "It's an album that I really need to get out of my system. There's a good album in there and it's ready to come out, and also there will be some Zeppelin things on the horizon." On December 10, 2007, the surviving members of Led Zeppelin, as well as John Bonham's son, Jason Bonham, played a charity concert at the O2 Arena, London. For the 2008 Olympics, Jimmy Page, David Beckham and Leona Lewis represented Britain during the closing ceremonies on August 24, 2008. Beckham rode a double-decker bus into the stadium and Page and Lewis performed Whole Lotta Love. In 2008 Page co-produced a documentary film directed by Davis Guggenheim entitled It Might Get Loud. The film examines the history of the electric guitar, focusing on the careers and styles of Page, The Edge and Jack White. A film premiered on September 5, 2008 at the Toronto Film Festival. Page also participated in the three-part BBC documentary London Calling, The Making of the Olympic Handover Ceremony on March 4, 2009. On April 4, 2009, Page inducted Jeff Beck into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Page has announced his 2010 solo tour while talking to the Sky News on December 16, 2009. On June 7, 2008, Page and John Paul Jones appeared with the Foo Fighters to close out the band's concert at Wembley Stadium, Performing Rock and Roll, and Ramble On.
2010s.
In January 2010, Jimmy Page announced an autobiography published by Genesis Publications, in a handcrafted, limited edition of 2,150 copies. Page was honored with the first-ever Global Peace Award by the United Nations Pathways to Peace organization after confirming reports that he would be among the headliners at a planned Show of Peace concert in Beijing, China, on October 10, 2010. On June 3, 2011, Jimmy Page played with Donovan at the Royal Albert Hall in London. The concert was filmed. Page made an unannounced appearance with the Black Crowes at the Shepherd's Bush Empire in London on July 13, 2011. He also played alongside Roy Harper at Harper's 70th birthday celebratory concert, in London's Royal Festival Hall on July 13, 2011. In November 2011, Conservative MP Louise Mensch launched a campaign to have Page knighted for his contributions to the music industry. In December 2012, Page, along with Plant and Jones, received the annual Kennedy Center honors from President Barack Obama in a White House ceremony. The honor is the U.S.'s highest award for those who have influenced American culture through the arts.
Legacy and influence.
Page's experiences both in the studio and with the Yardbirds were very influential in contributing to the success of Led Zeppelin in the 1970s. As a record producer, songwriter, and guitarist, he helped make Led Zeppelin a prototype for countless future rock bands and was one of the major driving forces behind the rock sound of that era, influencing a host of other guitarists. Allmusic states that just about every rock guitarist from the late 60s early 70s to the present day has been influenced by Page's work with Led Zeppelin. For example, Dictator's bassist Andy Sheranoff states that Jimmy Page's sped-up, downstroke guitar riff in Communication Breakdown, an influential song that contained elements of proto-punk, was an inspiration for Ramones guitarist Johnny Ramone's downstroke guitar style. Ramone, who has described Page as probably the greatest guitarist who ever lived, stated in the documentary Ramones, the true story that he improved at his downstroke picking style by playing the song over and over again for the bulk of his early career. Brian May of Queen, who was also influenced by Page, has said, "I don't think anyone has epitomized riff writing better than Jimmy Page, he's one of the great brains of rock music." Tom Scholz of Boston was heavily influenced by Jimmy Page and credits the dual guitar harmonies in Led Zeppelin's How Many More Times as the inspiration for Boston's distinctive sound. Page's guitar solo from the song Heartbreaker has been credited by Eddie Van Halen as being the inspiration for his two-hand tapping technique after he had seen Led Zeppelin perform in 1971. Similarly, Steve V has also commented about the song in a September 1998 Guitar World interview. "This one had the biggest impact on me as a youth. It was defiant, bold and edgier than hell. It really is the definitive rock guitar solo." Many other rock guitarists were also influenced by Jimmy Page, including Ace Frehley, Joe Satriani, John Frusciante, James Hetfield, Kirk Hammett, Zakk Wylde, Yngwie Malmsteen, Joe Perry, Richie Sambora, Angus Young, Slash, Dave Mustaine, Mike McCready, Jerry Cantrell, Stone Gossard, Mick Mars, Paul Stanley, Alex Lifeson, and Dan Hawkins, have all expressed his influence on their playing. Page has been described by Uncut as rock's greatest and most mysterious guitar hero. According to NPCnews.com, Jimmy Page played some of the most fundamental and memorable guitar in rock history, from the heaviest crunch to the most delicate acoustic finger-picking. Page's solo in the famous epic Stairway to Heaven has been voted by readers of Guitar World and Total Guitar as the greatest guitar solo of all time, and he was named Guitarist of the Year 5 times during the 1970s in Cre magazine's annual reader poll. Guitar World wrote, "Truly a guitar god, Jimmy Page is one of the most captivating soloists the rock world has ever known." In 1996, Mojo magazine ranked him number 7 on their list of 100 greatest guitarists of all time. In 2002 he was voted the second greatest guitarist of all time in a Total Guitar magazine reader poll. In 2007, Classic Rock magazine ranked him number 4 on their list of the 100 wildest guitar heroes. Jiguys.com, an online music magazine, ranked Page number 2 on their list of the 50 greatest guitarists ever in 2008. In August 2009, Time magazine ranked him the 6th greatest electric guitar player of all time. In 2010, Jimmy Page was ranked number 2 on Gibson's Top 50 Guitarists of All Time. In 2004, David Fricke, senior editor at Rolling Stone magazine, ranked him the 9th greatest guitarist of all time and described him as the pontiff of power riffing. In 2011, Page ranked number 3 in an updated version of the same list. Fricke also described Jimmy Page in 1988 as probably the most digitally sampled artist in pop today after James Brown. Roger Daltrey of The Who has been a longtime fan of Page and expressed his desire to form a supergroup with Page in 2010 saying, "I'd love to do something, I'd love to do an album with Jimmy Page." Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones has described Jimmy Page as one of the best guitar players I've ever known. Jimmy Page was the first inductee onto the British Walk of Fame in August 2004. Page was awarded Living Legend Award at Classic Rock magazine Roll of Honor 2007. In June 2008, he was awarded an honorary doctorate by the University of Surrey for his services to the music industry. Page was inducted into Mojo Hall of Fame at the magazine's award ceremony on June 11, 2010. In August 2010, Auburn University graduate student Justin Havard named a new species of fish Lepidcephalacthys zeppelini after Led Zeppelin, because the fish's pectoral fin reminded him of the double-neck guitar used by Jimmy Page.
Equipment and recording techniques. Guitars.
For the recording of most of Led Zeppelin material from Led Zeppelin's second album onwards, Page used a Gibson Les Paul guitar, sold to him by Joe Walsh, with Marshall amplification. A Harmony Sovereign H1260 was used in studio on Led Zeppelin III and Led Zeppelin IV and on stage from March 5, 1971 to June 28, 1972. During the studio sessions for Led Zeppelin and later for recording the guitar solo in Stairway to Heaven, he used a Fender Telecaster, a gift from Jeff Beck. He also used a Dane Electro 3021, tuned to Dajad, most notably on live performances of Kashmir. Page also plays his guitar with a cello bow, as on the live versions of the songs Dazed and Confused, and How Many More Times. This was a technique he developed during his session days. On MTV's Led Zeppelin rockumentary, Page said that he obtained the idea of playing the guitar with a bow from David McCallum, Sr., who was also a session musician. Page used his Fender Telecaster and later his Gibson Les Paul for his bow solos.
Notable guitars.
1959 Gibson Les Paul Standard, No. 1. Sold to Page by Joe Walsh for $1,200. This guitar was also used by Gibson as the model for the company's second run of Page signature models in 2004. Produced by Gibson and aged by luthier Tom Murphy, this second generation of Page tribute models was limited to 25 guitars signed by Page himself, and only 150 guitars in total for the aged model issue. 1959 Gibson Les Paul Standard, No. 2, with a shaved down neck to match the profile on his number 1. He added 4 push-pull pots to coil split the humbuckers as well as phase and series switches which were added under the pickguard after the breakup of Led Zeppelin. 1971 Gibson EDS 1275. Used for playing Stairway to Heaven, the song remains the same, the Rain Song, Celebration Day during live concerts, Tangerine, 1975 Earl's Court shows, and Sick Again, 1977 North American Tour, 1959 Fender Telecaster. Given to Page by Jeff Beck and repainted with a psychedelic dragon designed by Page. Played with the Yardbirds. Used to record the first Led Zeppelin album and used on the early tours during 1968-69. In 1971, it was used for recording the Stairway to Heaven solo. 1991 Gibson Les Paul Custom Shop. English luthier Roger Giffen built a guitar for Page based loosely on Page's number 2. Giffen's work was later copied for Gibson's original run of Jimmy Page signature model Les Pauls in the mid-1990s, 1961 Dane Electro 3021. Tuned to Dajad and used Live for White Summer, Black Mountain Side, Kashmir, and Midnight Moonlight with a firm. Also tuned to Open G Live for In My Time of Dying, 1958 Dane Electro 3021. Tuned to Open G and used on the Outrider tour. This one has a smaller pickguard, as opposed to the large sealed pickguard on his 1961 Dane Electro, 1967 Vox 12-string used during the recording for the Yardbirds album Little Games and for on-stage appearances, 1960 Black Gibson Les Paul Custom, with Bigsby tremolo, stolen in 1970. Page ran an ad requesting the return of this highly modified instrument, but the guitar was never recovered. In 2008 the Gibson Custom Shop produced a limited run of 25 recreations of the guitar, each with a Bigsby tremolo and a new custom 6-way toggle switch. Because the guitar was too heavy, one of Jimmy Page's Les Paul Custom Black Beauty guitars is now owned by Dan Hawkins of The Darkness. Because the guitar was too heavy, one of Jimmy Page's Les Paul Custom Black Beauty guitars is now owned by Dan Hawkins of The Darkness. 1953 Botswana Brown Fender Telecaster featuring a Parsons and Whiteby string bender, with a maple neck, and then salvaged the rosewood neck from the Dragon Telecaster. Seen primarily during the 1980s since it was one of his main guitars on stage during the Firm and Outrider era. Also used on the Led Zeppelin's 1977 North American concert tour and at Nebworth in 1979, notably on 10 Years Gone, and Hot Dog. 1969 Gibson Les Paul Deluxe, No. 3. Scene in the song remains the same during the theremin solo section of Whole Lotta Love, and for Kashmir at the O2 reunion concert. In 1985, the guitar was fitted with a Parsons Whiteby string bender and used extensively by Page from the mid to late 1980s onward, including the Outrider tour and the Page Plant Unleaded special on MTV. 1964 Lake Placid Blue Fender Stratocaster. Used during recording sessions for In Through the Outdoor at Earl's Court 1975 and in 1979 at Nebworth for In the Evening. 1966 Cream Fender Telecaster, used on Physical Graffiti and on All My Love during the tour over Europe 1980. 1965 Fender Electric 12-string, used to record Thank You, and Stairway to Heaven. 1972 Martin D28 used to record acoustic songs after Led Zeppelin 4, used Live at Earl's Court 1975. In 1994 Andy Manson was commissioned to make another triple neck guitar for Page. It was used during the unleaded performances.
Strings.
Ernie Ball's Super Slinky electric guitar strings 009S.042s.
Signature models.
Gibson released Jimmy Page signature Les Paul, discontinued in 1999, then released another version in 2004, which was also discontinued. The 2004 version included 25 guitars signed by Page, 150 aged by Tom Murphy, an acknowledged aging master, and 840 unlimited production guitars. The Jimmy Page signature EDS 1275 has been produced by Gibson. Recently, Gibson reproduced Page's 1960 Les Paul Black Beauty, the one stolen from him in 1970, with modern modifications. This guitar was sold in 2008 with a run of 25, again signed by Page, plus an additional 500 unsigned guitars. In December 2009, Gibson released the Jimmy Page No. 2 Les Paul. This is a recreation of Page's famous No. 2 Les Paul used by him since about 1974. The model includes the same pickup switching setup as devised by Page, shaved-down neck profile, burst bucker pickup at neck and Page bucker at the bridge. A total of 325 were made in 3 finishes, 25 aged by Gibson's Tom Murphy, signed and played by Page, $26,000, 100 aged, $16,000 and 200 with VOS finish, $12,000.
Amplifiers and effects.
He usually recorded in studio with a Vox AC30, Fender and Orange amplification. The first Led Zeppelin album was played on a Fender Telecaster through a Supro amplifier. Page used a limited number of effects, including a Maestro Echoplex, a Dunlop Crybaby, an MX Phase 90, a Vox Crybaby Wah, a Boss CE2 Chorus, a Yamaha CH10 MK2 Chorus, a Solar Sound Tone Bender Professional MK2, an MX Blue Box, Distortion Octaver, and a G-Tech Whammy. Page also played a theremin.
Music production techniques.
Jimmy Page is credited for the innovations in sound recording he brought to the studio during the years he was a member of Led Zeppelin, many of which he had initially developed as a session musician. He developed a reputation for employing effects in new ways and trying out different methods of using microphones and amplification. During the late 1960s, most British music producers placed microphones directly in front of amplifiers and drums, resulting in the sometimes tinny sound of the recordings of the era. Page commented to Guitar World magazine that he felt the drum sounds of the day in particular sounded like cardboard boxes. Instead, Page was a fan of 1950s recording techniques, Sun Studios being a particular favorite. In the same Guitar World interview, Page remarked, "Recording used to be a science, and used to have a maxim, distance equals depth." Taking this maxim to heart, Page developed the idea of placing an additional microphone some distance from the amplifier, as much as 20 feet, and then recording the balance between the two. By adopting this technique, Page became one of the first British producers to record a band's ambient sound the distance of a note's time lag from one end of the room to the other. For the recording of several Led Zeppelin tracks, such as Whole Lotta Love, and You Shook Me, Page additionally utilized reverse echo, a technique which he claims to have invented himself while with the Yardbirds. He had originally developed the method when recording the 1967 single 10 Little Indians. This production technique involved hearing the echo before the main sound instead of after it, achieved by turning the tape over and employing the echo on a spare track, then turning the tape back over again to get the echo preceding the signal. Page has stated that, as producer, he deliberately changed the audio engineers on Led Zeppelin albums, from Glyn Johns for the first album, to Eddie Kramer for Led Zeppelin II, to Andy Johns for Led Zeppelin III and later albums. He explained, "I consciously kept changing engineers because I didn't want people to think that they were responsible for our sound. I wanted people to know it was me." John Paul Jones acknowledged that Page's production techniques were a key component of the success of Led Zeppelin. In an interview that Page himself gave to Guitar World magazine in 1993, he remarked on his work as a producer.
Personal life.
French model Charlotte Martin was Page's partner from 1970 to about 1982 or 1983. Page called her "my lady." Together they have a daughter, Scarlett Page, born in 1971, who is a photographer. From 1986 to 1995 Page was married to Patricia Ecker, a model and waitress. They have a son, James Patrick Page III, born April 1988. Page later married Jimena Gomez Paracha, whom he met in Brazil on the No Quarter Tour. He adopted her oldest daughter Yana, born 1994, and they have two children together, Zofia Jade, born 1997, and Ashen Josen, born 1999. Page and Paracha divorced in 2008. In 1972 Page bought, from Richard Harris, the home that William Bergs, 1827–1881, designed for himself in London, the Tower House. "I had an interest going back to my teens in the pre-Raphaelite movement and the architecture of Bergs," he said. "What a wonderful world to discover." The reputation of Bergs rests on his extravagant designs and his contribution to the Gothic revival in architecture in the 19th century. Richard Cole, alleged that in the same year he, at the request of Page, kidnapped a 14-year-old girl, Laurie Maddox, whom Page then kept behind closed doors so as to avoid word of child sexual abuse getting out. From 1980 to 2004 Page owned the Mill House, Mill Lane, Windsor, which was formerly the home of actor Michael Caine. Fellow Led Zeppelin band member John Bonham died at the house in 1980. From the early 1970s to the early 1990s, Page owned the Boleskine House, the former residence of occultist Aleister Crowley. Sections of Page's fantasy sequence in the film The Song Remains the Same were filmed at night on the mountainside directly behind Boleskine House. According to Sunday Times Rich List, Page's assets are worth $75 million as of 2012. He resides in Sunning, Berkshire in Deanery Garden, a house designed by Edwin Lutyens for the owner of Country Life magazine, Edward Hudson. Page also previously owned Plumpton Place in Sussex, also formerly owned by Edward Hudson and with certain parts of the house also designed by Edwin Lutyens. This house features in the Zeppelin film The Song Remains the Same, where Jimmy is seen sitting on the lawn playing a hurdy-gurdy.
Recreational drug use.
Page has acknowledged heavy recreational drug use throughout the 1970s. In an interview with Guitar World magazine in 2003, he stated, "I can't speak for but for me drugs were an integral part of the whole thing, right from the beginning, right to the end." After the band's 1973 North American tour, Page told Nick Kent, "Oh, everyone went over the top a few times. I know I did and, to be honest with you, I don't really remember much of what happened." In 1975, Page began to use heroin, a claim attributed to Richard Cole, who stated that Page, in addition to himself, was taking the drug during the recording sessions of the album Presence in that year, and that Page admitted to him shortly afterwards that he was addicted to the drug. By Led Zeppelin's 1977 North American tour, Page's heroin addiction was beginning to hamper his guitar-playing performances. By this time the guitarist had lost a noticeable amount of weight. His on-stage appearance was not the only obvious change. His addiction caused Page to become so inward and isolated it altered the dynamics between him and Plant considerably. During the recording sessions for In Through the Outdoor in 1978, Page's diminished influence on the album, relative to bassist John Paul Jones, is partly attributed to his heroin addiction, which resulted in his absence from the studio for long periods of time. Page reportedly kicked his heroin habit in the early 1980s. In a 1988 interview with Musician magazine, Page took offense when the interviewer noted that heroin had been associated with his name and insisted, "Do I look as if I'm a smack addict? Well, I'm not. Thank you very much." In an interview he gave to Q magazine in 2003, Page responded to a question as to whether he regrets getting so involved in heroin and cocaine.
Interest in the occult.
The appearance of four symbols on the jacket of Led Zeppelin's fourth album has been linked to Page's interest in the occult. The four symbols represented each member of the band. Page's own so-called Zozo symbol originated in Ars Magica Artificiae, 1557, by Gerolamo Cardano, an old alchemical grimoire, where it has been identified as a sigil consisting of zodiac signs. The sigil is reproduced in Dictionary of Occult, Hermetic and Alchemical Sigils by Fred Gettings. During tours and performances after the release of the fourth album, Page often had the Zozo symbol embroidered on his clothes, along with zodiac symbols. These were visible most notably on his dragon suit, which included the signs for Capricorn, Scorpio and Cancer, which are Page's sun, ascendant and moon signs, respectively. The artwork inside the album cover of Led Zeppelin 4 is from a painting attributed to the artist Barrington Colby MOM, influenced by the traditional Rider-Waite tarot card design for the card called the Hermit. Very little is known about Colby, and rumors have persisted down the years that Page himself is responsible for the painting. Page transforms into this character during his fantasy sequence in Led Zeppelin's concert film The Song Remains the Same. In the early 1970s Page owned an occult bookshop and publishing house, the Equinox Booksellers and Publishers, in Kensington High Street, London, eventually closing it as the increasing success of Led Zeppelin occupied his time. The company published a facsimile of English occultist Aleister Crowley's 1904 edition of the Goetia. Page has maintained a strong interest in Crowley for many years. In 1978, he explained, Page was commissioned to write the soundtrack music for the film Lucifer Rising by Crowley admirer and underground movie director Kenneth Anger. Page ultimately produced 23 minutes of music, which Anger felt was insufficient because the film ran for 28 minutes and Anger wanted the film to have a full soundtrack. Anger claimed Page took 3 years to deliver the music and the final product was only 23 minutes of droning. The director also slammed the guitarist in the press by calling him a dabbler in the occult and an addict and being too strung out on drugs to complete the project. Page countered that he had fulfilled all his obligations, even going so far as to lend Anger his own film editing equipment to help him finish the project. Page released the Lucifer Rising music on vinyl in 2012 via his website on Lucifer Rising and other soundtracks. Side 1 contained Lucifer Rising, main track, whilst Side 2 contained the tracks Incubus, Damask, Unharmonics, Damask, Ambient, and Lucifer Rising, Percussive Return. In the December 2012 Rolling Stone cover story Jimmy Page Looks Back, Page said, "There was a request, suggesting that Lucifer Rising should come out again with my music on. I ignored it." Although Page collected works by Crowley, he has never described himself as a Thelemite nor was he ever initiated into the OTO. The Equinox bookstore and Boleskine House were both sold off during the 1980s, as Page settled into family life and participated in charity work. In her 2001 autobiography Rebel Heart, An American Rock and Roll Journey, B. Bell, a one-time love interest of Page's, recounts his interest in the occult in depth as part of her portrait of him.
Discography.
Whatever Happened to Jugular? 1985, with Roy Harper, The Firm, 1985, with The Firm, Mean Business, 1986, with The Firm, Outrider, 1988, Coverdale and Page, 1993, with David Coverdale, Walking into Clarksdale, 1998, with Robert Plant.
Footnotes.
Page, Jimmy. Jimmy Page by Jimmy Page, Genesis Publications, 2010. ISBN 978-1-905662-17-3, George Warren 2001, pages 773, Guller 2009, pages 151, ABCD Prato, Greg. Jimmy Page Biography. AllMusic. Retrieved November 11, 2008, Davis 1985, Case 2007, pages 5, Charles Shaw Murray, The Governors, Mojo, August 2004, pages 67, A.B. Crow, Cameron, March 13, 1975. The Durable Led Zeppelin. Rolling Stone. Retrieved December 16, 2012, ABC guitar legend Jimmy Page. NPR. June 2, 2003. Retrieved December 16, 2012, ABC D.E. Rosen, Stephen, May 25, 2007. 1977 Jimmy Page interview. Modern Guitars. Archived from the original on January 5, 2011. Retrieved December 16, 2012, ABC DEFGH Schultz, Dave. Interview with Jimmy Page. Trouser Press, October 1977. Retrieved December 16, 2012, ABCD Interview with Jimmy Page. Guitar World, May 1993. Retrieved December 17, 2012, A.B. Kendall 1981, pages 11, A.B. Case 2007, pages 294, ABCD Paul, Du Noyer. Who the Hell Does Jimmy Page Think He Is? Q Magazine, August 1988, 5-7, ABC Kingsmill, Richard. Led Zeppelin Triple J Music Specials. Australian Broadcasting Corporation. Retrieved July 12, 2000, Booklet of the Kinks Deluxe Edition Sanctuary Records 2011, Booklet of the Kinks Picture Book Box Set Sanctuary Records 2008, Official Discography. The Who September 13, 1971. Retrieved January 14, 2013, Jeff Beck Interview, PDF. Hit Parader, April 1966. Retrieved January 12, 2013, I First Met Jimmy on Torworth Broadway, Holding a Bag of Exotic Fish. Uncut, January 2009, pages 40-41. Dominic A. Misrandino, Led Zeppelin, John Paul Jones, thecelebritycafe.com, unofficial website. Jimmy Page Online. Retrieved September 11, 2010, A.B. David Kavanagh, Uncut, Case 2007, pages 164, Report. BBC News August 4, 2004. Retrieved September 11, 2010, A.B. Lewis in Pilot 1997, pages 139, Led Zepp's Page joins Limp Bizkit's Dust and Puddle of Mud Scantlin on stage. Yahoo! October 11, 2001. Retrieved February 17, 2007, Jimmy Page given OBE for charity work. CBC Car Arts, CBC. December 14, 2005. Retrieved January 6, 2007, Zeppelin's Page made Rio citizen. BBC News, BBC. September 22, 2006. Retrieved January 6, 2007, Hans Worksman, September 21, 2006. Wolfmother Live at Led Zepp's induction, weblog. Here Comes the Flood. Hans Worksman. Retrieved November 13, 2013, Led Zeppelin make UK Hall of Fame. BBC News May 23, 2006. Retrieved December 10, 2007, Jimmy Page talks on new album. Ultimate Guitar. Ultimate Guitar. November 16, 2006. Retrieved January 9, 2009, Knight, Tom. London Rap Troupe fly flag at Beijing Olympics. The Telegraph. June 16, 2008. Retrieved July 24, 2008, It Might Get Loud. It Might Get Loud. Little Film Company September 5, 2008. Retrieved April 4, 2009, Olympic documentary London Calling, screens this week. Thiers London. Radio Movies. February 28, 2009. Retrieved April 4, 2009, Jeff Beck. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Retrieved December 17, 2012, Jimmy Makes It Celebration Day for Fans. Sky News December 16, 2009. Retrieved January 13, 2013, Barnes, Ellen, January 18, 2010. Jimmy Page announces free concert, wins UN Peace Award, plots solo tour. Gibson. Retrieved January 13, 2013, Jimmy Page, The Photographic Autobiography. Genesis Publications. Retrieved September 11, 2010, Guitarist Jimmy Page receives UN Award. Yahoo! India. January 15, 2010. Archived from the original on January 19, 2010. Retrieved January 15, 2013, Page lands Peace Prize. Contact Music. January 15, 2010. Retrieved January 15, 2013, Craig Dunning, November 16, 2011. British MP lobbying for knighthood for Led Zeppelin guitarist Jimmy Page. Daily Telegraph. Retrieved November 16, 2011, Suppick, Evan, December 3, 2012. Led Zeppelin get All-Star Tribute at Kennedy Center Honors. Rolling Stone. Retrieved January 13, 2013, Chipkin and Stang 2003, pages 85, Their Time Is Gonna Come, Classic Rock Magazine, December 2007, Cott, Greg. Led Zeppelin, Album Guide. Rolling Stone. Retrieved December 9, 2010, Hoskins 2006, Everett, True, Hey Ho Let's Go, The Story of the Ramones, 2002, 13, Robert, Jones, April 2, 2003. Conservative Punk's Interview with Johnny Ramone. Retrieved December 2, 2010, Ramones, The True Story. Classic Rock Legends. B-O-100 CRSF-6W, Prato, Greg, July 19, 1947. Brian May at Allmusic. AllMusic. Retrieved September 11, 2010, Brian May, Personal Quote. IMDb. Retrieved February 15, 2010, Cox, J. Time Music, Boston Sonic Mystery Tour September 25, 1978, Chilvers, C.J. The Van Halen Encyclopedia, 2001, 6, Jeff Kitts and Brad Twilinski. Guitar World presents 100 Greatest Guitarists of All Time, Ace Frehley interview. ModernGuitars.com. Retrieved September 11, 2010, Joe Satriani interview. Metal-Rules.com. Retrieved September 11, 2010, Muccio Selvaggio 2004 interview. Wycliffe quote. Retrieved February 15, 2010, Prato, Greg, August 3, 1963. James Hetfield. AllMusic. Retrieved September 11, 2010, Kirk Hammett, Official Biography. Retrieved January 15, 2013, Ankney, Jason, January 14, 1967. Zakk Wylde. AllMusic. Retrieved September 11, 2010, Inge Malmsteen at AllMusic. Site Trey Anastasio Web last equals Elliot first equals Paul equals http://www.aerofshun.com/ index.cfm/ pk/ view/ cd/ naa/ did/ 312413/ pid/ 3027666% 7 title equal Joe Perry interview publisher equals Mojo date equals September 17, 2004 access date equals January 15, 2013, Richie Sambora. MPCA Music Publishing. Retrieved January 15, 2013, Prato, Greg, March 31, 1955. Angus Young at AllMusic. AllMusic. Retrieved September 11, 2010, /interview. snakeepit.org. Retrieved November 11, 2010, Dave Mustaine, My Life Isn't About Name-Calling and Mudslinging. Blabbermouth.net April 5, 2010. Retrieved January 15, 2013, Prato, Greg, April 5, 1966. Mike McCready at AllMusic. AllMusic. Retrieved September 11, 2010, Prato, Greg, March 18, 1966. Jerry Cantrell at AllMusic. AllMusic. Retrieved September 11, 2010, Prato, Greg, July 20, 1966. Stone Gossard at AllMusic. AllMusic. Retrieved September 11, 2010, Mick Mars interview, Prato, Greg, January 20, 1952. Paul Stanley at AllMusic. AllMusic.com. Retrieved September 11, 2010, Alex Lifeson interview. Guitar player. February 1, 2006. Retrieved January 15, 2013, Farley, Mike, June 6, 2007. Dan Hawkins interview. BULLZ-I.com. Retrieved September 11, 2010, Nick Hasted. The Real Jimmy Page, Part 2. Uncut. Retrieved May 30, 2010, Olson, Eric, March 30, 2004. The 10 Best Rock Bands Ever. mpnews.com. Retrieved December 16, 2012, 100 Greatest Guitar Solos. About, Guitar. The New York Times Company. Retrieved January 6, 2007, Soloing Strategies, Jimmy Page. Guitar World. April 14, 2012. Retrieved January 15, 2013, Mojo, 100 Greatest Guitarists of All Time. rocklessmusic.co.uk. Retrieved September 11, 2010, Hendrix Tops Guitar Greats Poll. BBC News August 7, 2002. Retrieved September 11, 2010, Jimi Hendrix, Dimebag, Tony Iommi, Eddie Van Halen are among wildest guitar heroes. Blabbermouth.net March 6, 2007. Retrieved January 15, 2013, The 50 Greatest Guitarists Ever. Jiguys.com. Retrieved January 14, 2010, The 10 Greatest Electric Guitar Players, Jimmy Page. Time. August 14, 2009. Retrieved January 15, 2013. Gibson.com Top 50 Guitarists of All Time, 10 to 1. Gibson. Retrieved December 16, 2012. A.B. Frick, David, August 25, 1988. Outrider Review. Rolling Stone. Retrieved December 16, 2012. 100 Greatest Guitarists, David Frick's Picks, Jimmy Page. Rolling Stone. Retrieved December 9, 2012. 100 Greatest Guitarists, Jimmy Page. Rolling Stone. Retrieved December 9, 2012. Daltrey's Page Collaboration. Canadian Online Explorer. February 24, 2010. Retrieved December 16, 2012. Roger Daltrey wants to form band with Led Zeppelin's Jimmy Page. JGuys.com. February 22, 2010. Retrieved February 24, 2010. Keith Richards, About Led Zeppelin. YouTube. Retrieved January 14, 2013. D'Souza, Carl, August 23, 2004. Page gets first star on British Walk of Fame. USA Today. Retrieved February 20, 2010. Jimmy Page awarded Living Legend Award at Classic Rock Magazine Roll of Honor 2007. Gibson. June 24, 2008. Retrieved September 11, 2010. United Kingdom. University of Surrey awards honorary doctorate to Jimmy Page. Surrey.ac.uk. Retrieved September 11, 2010. Led Zeppelin's Jimmy Page awarded honorary doctorate. NME. UK. June 26, 2008. Retrieved September 11, 2010. Led Zeppelin's Jimmy Page celebrated at Mojo Awards. BBC News June 11, 2010. Retrieved January 15, 2013. Leanne Bright. Museum receives $2.7 million to study largest group of freshwater fish. Florida Museum of Natural History, Andrew Vaughan. Hammer of the Cods, Led Zeppelin's Fishy Tale. Gibson, Charles Shaw Murray, 21st Century Digital Man, Classic Rock Magazine, Classic Rock Presents Led Zeppelin, 2008, pages 56, Lewis 2004, pages 67, Fast 2001, pages 210, Calho 2003, pages 119, Cello Bow Led-Zeppelin.org. Retrieved December 16, 2012, A.B. Bacon 2000, pages 121, Higgs, Simon. Jimmy Page's Signature Les Paul. Retrieved January 15, 2013, Case 2007, pages 80, Luthier Roger Giffen with Jimmy Page's 1959 Les Paul No. 2. GiffenItars.com. Retrieved September 11, 2010, Gibson built, Jimmy Page okayed, yours for just $20,999 Canada.com. April 3, 2008. Retrieved January 3, 2013, Molander, Michael, January 2004. Lords of the Prance. Guitar player. Retrieved December 9, 2007, Manson Triple Neck Acoustic Instrument Led-Zeppelin.org. Retrieved March 19, 2012, http://www.enable.com/ Artists.php, 9.6 rating Jimmy Page No. 2 Les Paul. Gibson. Retrieved July 4, 2011, ABCD Gress, Jesse, July 2011. 10 Things You Gotta Do to Play Like Jimmy Page. Guitar Player pages 74 to 88, Cleveland, Barry, August 2008. Passing Notes, Mike Battle. Guitar Player 42, 8, 60, Campion 2010, pages 62, ABCD Tolinsky, Brad. Greg DiBenedetto, January 1998. Light and Shade. Guitar World. Archived from the original on September 15, 2007. Retrieved December 10, 2007. Site uses deprecated parameters. Help, Rock Sonic Architect, Classic Rock Magazine, December 2007. Ian Fortnum, Dazed and Confused, Classic Rock Magazine, Classic Rock Presents Led Zeppelin, 2008, pages 41. A. B. Gilmore, Michael, August 10, 2006. The Long Shadow of Led Zeppelin. Rolling Stone, 1006. Retrieved December 9, 2007. ABC Trust History, Who We Are. abctrust.org.uk. Retrieved January 1, 2012. Case 2007, pages 227, Rock Legends Pilgrimage to Castle. BBC News May 20, 2004. Retrieved February 17, 2007. Davis, Stephen, 2005. Hammer of the Gods, Led Zeppelin Unauthorized. Pan Macmillan. ISBN 9780330438599, Led Zeppelin, There Was a Whole Lotta Love on Tour. London, The Independent. December 7, 2007. A. B. James Jackson, Jimmy Page on Led Zeppelin's Good Times, Bad Times and Reunion Rumors, The Times, January 8, 2010, Led Zeppelin Biography. Rolling Stone. Retrieved January 14, 2013, Music Millionaires. The Sunday Times. Times Newspapers Limited April 26, 2012. Retrieved December 17, 2012, Dolinsky, Brad. The Greatest Show on Earth, Guitar World, July 2003. Republished in Guitar Legends magazine, Winter 2004, pages 72. Case, George, Jimmy Page, Magnus, Musician, Man, Hal Leonard Books 2007. Excerpt printed in Guitar World, May 2007, pages 52, Cole 1992, pages 322 to 326, Davis, Stephen, July 4, 1985. Power, Mystery and the Hammer of the Gods, The Rise and Fall of Led Zeppelin. Rolling Stone, 451. Retrieved January 15, 2008, Fast 2001, pages 47, A. Zellwood, John. Closing Time, Q Magazine Special Led Zeppelin Edition, 2003, pages 94, Davis 1985, pages 316 to 317, Dunoyer, Paul. Who the Hell Does Jimmy Page Think He Is? Q Magazine, August 1988, pages 6, Kent, Nick. Bring It On Home, Q Magazine, Special Led Zeppelin Edition, 2003, A. B. Jimmy Page Interview, Guitar World, January 2008, Gettings 1981, pages 201, Jimmy Page's Symbol. September 17, 2009. Retrieved December 4, 2009, Sounds, March 13, 1978, The Story Behind the Lost Lucifer Rising Soundtrack, Guitar World, October 2006.